Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks. How's everybody doing today? Kind of a crazy market out there. So what we decided to do, rather than to alternate between broker update and contract class, is we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of talk about the market and some of the things going on. And then we will move into contract topic. So and if there's any particular questions that you have, put them in the chat. I'll keep track of the chat here. And if not, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question. How's that? So market-wise, there's a lot of angst in the market right now. So when you're working with a buyer, try to set their expectations that because of the lack of supply, many of your situations are going to involve multiple offers. So you need to be a little bit out ahead of this when you're showing them property. When they start to like a particular home, you need to kind of acclimate them to the climate of the market and make sure that they understand that. We'll talk a little bit about valuation here in the next segment, but make sure they understand, the current market. And if if there's a listing for 785,000 and the buyer says, well, it's 10 years old and it needs a little bit of work, let's go in at 650. You kind of have to explain to them that that's not a good use of their time. Most of the market, as we see the market stats, most of the pricing is between 98 and over 100% of list price in this market. So try to make sure that as you're showing the property and as you're building a relationship with them, that you understand and that they understand the market conditions. And so you don't end up spinning your wheels a lot trying to make offers on properties that probably don't have a lot of likelihood of acceptance. So the second part of working with a buyer is if your buyer becomes interested in the property and you've kind of decided what kind of an offer you're going to make, call the listing agent. Always call the listing agent before you submit an offer, because you need to know what the lay of the land is. You need to know from the listing agent what's going on with that property. Do you have any other offers? Do you have some offers, any of the offers above your list price? Are you accepting any offers with financing? Do you require any particular type of contract, as is or normal? If kind of get in relationship with the listing agent a little bit and say, how's it going? I mean, is there anything that the seller is particularly interested in that is above and beyond the price? Many of them want a lease back for at least a month or two or a little longer. That can set your offer aside from a standard offer that might even be a little higher. If there's a lot of cash offers, or if the listing agent will tell you, a little bit about the quality and quantity of the offers, you can kind of get a feel for what you and your buyer should work on when you present your offer. But if there's furniture involved, if there's any particular thing that the seller would like to see in the offer, that's a great thing to make note of. So when you do put your offer together, you're putting your best foot forward for your buyer. So that's really important in this market, and it's really important that you explain to your buyer that chances are they're going to be competing against other buyers. We also offer the KW Escalation Clause, which we can go over a little bit today. I'll bring that up. But basically, a buyer may or may not want to use an escalation clause, but the reason you use an escalation clause is because, let's say the house is priced at 500 and you've talked to the listing agent and they have 8 other offers, a few of them above list price. So you say to your buyer, well, what do you think? and they're like, well, we could go in at 510 or 515. I don't mind paying that, but I'm actually willing to pay, as much as 530. So now you have a situation where the buyer's willing to pay more than the list price, but possibly an escalation clause could be used if there's a pretty decent separation between, let's say, the offer price of 500 or 510, and they're willing to pay 530 or 535. The purpose of the escalation clause is that the buyer may be able to buy the property without going to their max. So they might go in, let's say, at 510 with an escalation clause up to 530. Now, the way an escalation clause works is we have an increment, usually 1,000 or 2,000. Don't suggest you make the increment any higher than that, because that's really the amount that the buyer is going to pay over the next best offer. So we put an escalation clause together. Yes, Pesci, you add that as one of the additional items, just like an HOA disclosure or a CDD addendum or anything. It's referenced in the contract and added on. So, let me just go ahead and I'll bring that up here, and we'll go ahead and take a look at an escalation clause real quick, just so you have it. All right. Back to Zoom. Back to my Zoom. Back to my Zoom. Can everybody see that okay? Just give me a thumbs up on your screen there if you can see it okay. Yes? Okay, so this is an escalation clause. And this is one that we work with a local attorney to develop for Keller Williams. Unfortunately, we have difficulty getting some of this stuff in the library. So if you want to use this one, there's also a FAR bar escalation addendum and a NABOR one. We kind of prefer to use this one since it's a little bit more detailed, but understand that not every buyer is going to feel comfortable using this. And if they feel very uncomfortable about competing offers and about the seller being able to share the information about competing offers, maybe they're not a great candidate. And if they're like, well, the price is 500, I'm willing to go in at 505 and I'm willing to go as high as 510, that's not a good candidate for the escalation addendum. You want to have a reasonable amount of separation between your offer price and the maximum price that your buyer's willing to pay. Also, when you're talking to them about the using an escalation clause, you want to ask them if they say, well, I'm willing to go in at 515 on 500, but I don't really want to pay much more than 525. The question you have to ask them is, okay, if someone were to beat your offer by $1,000 over 525, would you be disappointed? If the answer is, yeah, kind of, I guess I could go a little higher than that. Maybe I should go, what about 535? Okay, now you're talking about a gap, a significant difference between your offer price and your cap. So then an escalation clause could save your buyer some money if the next best offer is 526 and your buyer gets it at 527 or 528. They don't have to go all the way to their cap. So the whole idea of the escalation clause is you'll see under purchase price. We talk about the net proceeds of the offer in our escalation clause. Some of the other escalation addendums do not, but you know, a net price means if there's other parts of competing offers, like let's say furniture is included in one offer and not in another, and there's a difference there. The seller has to consider how much they're going to get net. And that's what we're encouraging them to do. So if somebody says, you know, I want a $5,000 credit at closing, then the question becomes, what's the net? So you're going to go here to this middle of the page here, and you're going to pick an increment. And I recommend an increment of $1,000 or $2,000 tops. People say, well, I put 5,000 in there and make my offer stronger. No, that really just means your buyer is going to pay $5,000 more than the next best offer. So keep that increment small. And then, like I say, put in your cap as to what the buyer's maximum that there is to pay. Okay. So we talk about the competing offer. It's important for the buyer to understand that a competing offer has got to be a bona fide, arm's length written offer. It can't be, you know, I call up my brother-in-law and say, hey, can you throw an offer in? I'd like to drive the price up. That's not legit and it's not ethical. So you should be competing against other offers that may or may not have an escalation clause, right? So if there's more than one offer with an escalation clause, they just keep escalating by the increment until someone hits the cap. And then if your offer for your customers over that cap, then obviously your offer would take precedent. So it doesn't matter how many escalation clauses there are or how many increments there are. It's just all incrementing up until somebody hits a cap. The one over that cap would take precedent. Now, the seller has to provide you with a copy of the bona fide offer. It has to be a signed offer. People ask, can I redact the buyer's name? Possibly, yes, but you can't redact so many things that the contract doesn't look that you created your escalation. It has to be a bona fide arm's length contract that's legit. A seller does have to provide you with a copy of that offer, and also with your offer originally drawn through the final price and the initials. All parties have to initial that. Okay. So these are not difficult to use. These are not difficult to use, but you have to make sure that your buyer is comfortable with it and doesn't feel like, I had one the other day, the buyer's like, well, how do I know it's a bona fide offer? Well, you know, what happens if they just take my offer and use it to get another one? You know, I mean, if you get a lot of, like I call it a suspicious buyer, maybe then that's not a great thing. The other side of the coin is the seller does not have to accept an escalation addendum. They could counter back at your max or above your max. So the seller can say, I don't like escalation clauses. Many attorneys don't like them. So it could be a case where your escalation clause isn't going to be used. It's going to be based on your best offer. But I encourage you to understand these and to use them when needed and to be able to offer your buyer the option, because they can and have been very successful in the market and winning a bid. Let's look at page 2 here real quickly. If there's financing involved, understand the ramifications of financing on an escalation clause. Excuse me. So if the buyer is financing, remember we have a page 1 of the contract, we have a amount financed, and usually that amount financed doesn't change. The buyer is agreeing in their escalation clause to pay the difference in cash, all right, which is box 1. If you have a pre-approval from the lender that's sufficient enough to add the amount to the loan, you can check box 2. And then on the third line there is the loan amount stated in the reference shall automatically increase to be a percentage of the new purchase price. Understanding that if the buyer is not willing to pay the difference in cash, that could affect the escalation clause. In other words, if the buyer's dependent upon being able to increase their financing amount, then maybe that offer is not as strong as somebody that says, I'm going to pay the difference in cash. So just understand, if the buyer wants to adjust their financing based on the escalation clause, that they could be making their offer a little less attractive. Note at the bottom, if nothing is checked there, the buyer agrees to pay the difference in cash. Note at the bottom, we've asked the buyer to certify that they've done this on their own volition, that you haven't twisted their arm, and that they don't feel like they're doing this because they have to win the bid. They have to do it because they like the concept of an escalation clause, and they feel like this is going to help them possibly to be able to buy the property without having to pay their maximum. Knowing the fact that they're already telling the seller when you submit the offer how much they're willing, max they're willing to pay. So let's see. I don't see anything in the chat. Does anybody want to unmute and ask a question? Well, if you have a question and you want to use this clause, please call me. I'm happy to go over it with you.
Do you have a quick question?
Okay, go ahead.
With the second option, where the amount will be added to the loan, how does the buyer know that it will appraise that way?
The buyer would have to have, a discussion with their lender. I hope I'm answering your question. That the buyer would have to have a approval from their lender that if they went to the higher amount, that they could get financing for it. So
okay, and even though if it wouldn't appraise that way, because then the buyer would have to come up with the difference in cash anyways, right?
Correct. Or
okay,
the percentage wise, in other words, if they're getting an 80% loan, they would have to come up with at least 20% of the difference. But typically, your best shot at this is to
check the first
have the buyer plan to pay cash for the difference.
Okay, thank you.
But it's possible if you talk to the lender says, hey, you're good to 550. Then you could conceivably do that. But it would be great if your pre-approval letter said 550, so that the seller's not saying, I wonder if they could, borrow the money. And it's kind of implied, if buyer and seller accept this, that seller can't come back and go, oh, gee, I can't get my loan, I'll see you later. This is pretty much an absolute thing that if I can't get it financed, I'm going to pay the cash, but I'm committing to pay this price, right? Otherwise, there'd be another open door to the escalation clause, which there really isn't in the way this document's written. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. One other thing I'd like to cover today, before we get into contract stuff, is can everybody see this okay? Let me bring it back down to the page. There. Make it a little bigger. There we go. Okay, so a lot of people are, when they're making offers, especially if you work with a buyer that has lost a few offers. They are coming up with ways to try to make their offer stronger in the eyes of the seller. And one of the things that I see, is I do get the opportunity to look at all the contracts as they come through, is I see a number of people are suggesting that the buyer waive their inspection to make it clear to the seller, hey, this is real easy. I'm not going to inspect it. I'm going to take it the way it is. And so paragraph 1 in the buyer's notice says, hey, we encourage you to have an inspection. It's okay to say in your contract, buyer, if you're going in as is, buyer will not request any repairs or credits. That's fine. But when you say I'm waiving inspections, understand that the buyer has no ability to determine if there's any defects in that house. We've listed several: air conditioning, appliances, water heaters, plumbing, electrical, roof structure, pool, termites, mold, radon. Those are all things that could get picked up in an inspection that should probably cost $400 or $500 tops. And at least the buyer knows. They may be willing to accept those things in the condition that they're in, but especially if you're on an as-is contract, you'd like to know that, and before you proceed too much further during your due diligence period, you like to know that. But if you waive your rights to inspect, you don't get any of that. And also, let's look at paragraph 2. If you waive your rights to inspect, you are giving up the right to access the property until the walkthrough inspection. And many people don't realize that. And you're trying to explain the contract to them and all the nuances of the offer. Understand that if they waive their inspection, the only time they can look at that property is the day before, the day of, or the day before closing, which is really scary, because the seller does not have to let you in the property for any reason until the day before closing. And I don't think people many times realize that when they're trying to make their offer stronger. So if they decide to do that, we have this handy little buyer's notice, and we ask that you get the buyer or buyers to sign it, saying, okay, we've had this discussion. I understand the dangers and the risks that I'm taking on, but I want to do it anyhow. Okay, but you notice that they're waiving their right to come after Keller Williams and you as the agent if they decide to do that. And that's very important because broker Jeff gets a lot of phone calls, and some of the worst are phone calls from a buyer who's decided. I had a buyer who was a builder, decided, oh, I'm a builder, I'll waive inspections, I don't care. Got in the house, there was a leak in the air conditioner and there was mold. Now he wants to come back and know, somebody must have known about that mold. Who do I sue? Who do I go after? I mean, the fact is that you waived your rights and you live with what you get. So understand that we don't recommend that a buyer waive their inspection. And we ask that in order for you to get your contract accepted in direct payment access, you got to have this form. We have to protect ourselves from the ramifications of people taking that kind of risk. And let's look quickly at paragraph 3. Okay, paragraph 3 says that if I'm going to make a cash offer, and this one probably comes into play as much, if not more, than the waiving of inspections, they get into a couple of deals where they lose out because they're offering financing and they lose out to cash deals. So they say, okay, let's just go in cash and I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'll get a loan. And then they're basically putting their deposit at risk. So the question to them is, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if you're unable to get the mortgage that you're talking about and close by the closing date that we're talking about, do you have the money to close? And if they say to you, no, I won't be able to close on this house till if I don't get the loan, then you've got to say to them, your deposit is going to be at risk because you're actually telling the seller you're going in cash. It's fine if you want to get a mortgage, but you've promised to pay on the closing date the total amount in cash beyond the deposit. So if you're not able to get your loan, you know, you can't hold us liable for any damages that happen when you lose your deposit. And I know this all sounds very negative. It doesn't have to be presented as a negative. It has to be presented as unnecessary risk. So, you know, really, if a buyer has to have a mortgage to get, you know, to do the sale, that's the reason we have the financing contingency. That's the reason the buyer is protected if there's a problem with the appraisal, if there's, you know, a problem in their credit or whatever that they're not aware of. Something comes up between the time they apply for the loan and the time the loan approval comes up. All kinds of things can happen. And that's why the financing contingency is there to protect the buyer. So any, check the chat. I don't see anything in the chat. Any questions or comments? We want you to sign this. Again, if you don't have a copy of this, just send me an email. I'll send it right back to you. We're still trying to figure out a way to get it in the libraries for both offices, but it's really easily available. If you'd like it to have handy, just send me an email after this meeting and say, I'd like to have the buyer's notice. Then you'll have it in the event that it comes up. And it unfortunately is coming up more than we would hope. But again, it's not so much the buyer sign, but the words in here, as much as your relationship with the buyer, as much as you're counseling them to the risks that they're taking if they decide to take these steps.
I have a quick question, Jeff.
Sure.
Do we have to get this always signed at any transaction or only if they want to waive inspection and stuff like
Right. If they want to waive inspection or if they want to go in cash,
that?
say I have to have a mortgage to close. You know, many people have the cash and they just don't want to take it out of the market or out of an investment when they can borrow the money at, you know, 3% or 3.5%. So that's fine as long as they have the money to close if their loan doesn't go through or if there's a problem with the appraisal or anything else. So it's only needed if the buyers decide to take either of these actions, waive inspections or go in cash when they need to have the mortgage.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right. I think that really that the two or three things we've covered here are really applicable to today's market. You know, there are new listings coming on the market every day. And if you're working with a buyer and they're struggling to find a home to buy and they are losing out on offers, there's a few things you can do. First of all, if let's say you're in the bidding process of a home and your offer loses out to another offer, but the listing agent calls you and says, hey, you know, your offer was great. We just happened to take another one. My suggestion to you is the first question you ask is, will you accept a backup offer? In most cases, the listing agent will say, sure, we'll take your offer as a backup offer. All you have to do is to submit the addendum to the contract signed by the buyer and then ultimately the seller to make the offer a backup offer. What does a backup offer do? The backup offer says that if the primary offer falls through for any reason, the seller at their discretion can notify you that you're now the primary offer, and now everything begins as though you just went to contract on the date that they notify you. So that becomes the effective date of your contract. So empirically, a lot of these are going through. So what's the advantage of that? Your buyer's interested in the home, would love to buy it if they get a chance. Many of these contracts are going in as is. Unfortunately, people are making offers on more than one property because of the nature of the inventory. So there's a likelihood we think as much as 30 to 35% of the time, the primary contract falls out. Either an inspection item, or the buyer's made more than one offer, decides to move on to another property, or they've never seen it. They're buying it sight unseen, they fly down, they go, oh no, I don't want this. So the as-is contract, which, as many of you know, I'm not a big fan of, does allow the buyer to pretty much walk away scot-free if they decide during their due diligence period that they're not interested anymore. And if you're sitting there in a backup position, you could find out in a week or 10 days or 2 weeks that your offers is going through, especially because it might be more difficult to find another property for the buyer that meets their needs if they've already lost out on a couple of offers, in that neighborhood or in that area or that price point. So I really encourage you to do backup offers. Again, there's an addendum to the contract that goes in, and all you do is submit that with the offer. Let's see what we can do here. I'll probably bring that up real quick. Zoom, share screen. There we go. Okay, so this is the neighbor version. There's another version that's very similar for Farbar, but basically all we're doing is adding this addendum in, and we're putting the buyer and the seller and the address of the property. The third party buyer identified, that's not really necessary. I'm not sure why we have that in the contract, but you can put NA in there. And then the second blank, if you put a time and date in there, that's the time period for which your backup offer is valid, okay? And you can put a date in there where, let's say we'll wait a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, in which case that's the length of time your backup offer is valid. Or if you leave it blank, basically the offer is valid until you terminate it. So not sure, the strength or one way or the other, but if you don't put anything in there, you may terminate the backup offer at any time by giving receiving notice. No date is inserted above. Buyer may terminate this backup contract at any time prior to the receipt of the primary contact termination notice. So if you leave that blank, basically you're free to terminate that offer if you find another property, or if your buyer decides they no longer want to be, in backup position there. What happens if, meanwhile, the buyer finds another property and gets that offer accepted? Well, the odds that it would get accepted at the same time are probably slim and none. But the minute your buyer puts an offer in on the other property, I would rescind my backup offer just to avoid that possibility. You definitely don't want to be notified that you're now the primary offer and you have an acceptance on the other offer, because you could end up in a kind of a pickle. So if your buyer says, I'm going to put an offer in on another property, probably a good idea to terminate the backup offer so you don't end up owning two. Or you could go in as is, I guess, on the second property, but that's kind of cluttering up the market with offers that we got 2 offers out there. We're only going to pick one. So, any other questions? You got to include this as part of the backup. It's signed by the seller and the buyer saying, if this offer becomes primary, we're going to do it at the terms and the price that we've agreed on. There is a possibility that the seller can accept more than one backup offer. and can go back to those backup offers and say, okay, we've got 3 backup offers, we'll do highest and best. Very rare, but usually when you're accepted as a backup offer, you're one step away from being primary. You don't have to have any kind of a form, you just need to do email notification to the listing agent. And you need, just make sure the listing agent confirms receipt. But your email to the, you're not really you're terminating the backup offer, you're not terminating the contract. So a written notice of any kind will work on that. Okay. All righty then. So we have here today, we have the backup contract out of there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. I want to go to the page of matrix here. Let me see if I can do this. Share screen. There we go. Can everybody see that okay? Yes? Give me a thumbs up. So this is hopefully what your dashboard looks like in MLS, okay? And you probably have a market watch widget somewhere like that. Has everybody seen that widget before?
Yes.
So you see this little thing back on market? There's 152 properties that have come back on the market in the last 7 days in our MLS. What does that mean? That means that those are contracts that have fallen through. There was no backup offer that came back active on the market. Now you can always go in and customize this number a little bit, maybe to Naples or to a particular market, but you can look at this data from 24 hours up to 7 days. So can everybody see that okay? Okay. Let's look at this. I just sorted this days on market. So there's 158 of them. I could sort it by development name or sub-condo name or by price. But look at the number of properties that have come back on the market in less than 10 days. So we have to go out to like number 75 or 73 till we get to 10 days. And let's say half of them, 76 out of 158, are less than 15 days back on the market before they came back on the market. So what's that telling you? Properties in this category are cycling through. So if you were looking for a buyer and you want to find other properties that have just come back on the market, you can continue to look at active, but you can also take a look at this particular time or customize it to your particular search area, and you can get a daily update of what's come back on the market. So you can jump on it pretty quickly if you see all of a sudden, the other thing I could do is I could go back here and sort this by development name. All right. Then I can go back to my particular area. Okay. And I can look at, well, there's one in Lake Park, that just came back on the market. And maybe I'll, want to show that to my buyer. So this is a kind of a cool way of looking at things that have just been on the market a few days and are coming back on. So you got the backup offer you can make on a property that your buyer didn't get the first bid. And you can also start taking a look at things that are coming back on the market, and they're coming back on the market quickly. So a property that might have been pending a couple of weeks ago, boom, it's back active again. The other thing I would encourage you to do is, if you're in a particular neighborhood and you are looking in that neighborhood, take a look at the pendings, or even that, or go in and do a search for pending contingent, listings in that neighborhood and go ahead and call the listing agent. Say, hey, I see your pending contingent here. It says financing. How does it look? Well, we haven't heard from the buyer. We're not sure what's going on. Oh, can we send a backup offer in? So even though the market's tough, even though if I do a search in the MLS for residential properties, even though there's only 2,800 in all of MLS and only 950 listings in all of Naples, and only 234 in the Benito Estero area, that's not very many. But I'm just trying to go over ways with you that you can expand your opportunity and say, you know, how many are pending contingent in that market? There's 265 of them that are pending contingent, as many pending contingent as active. And out of that, how many are pending contingent for inspection is one, especially if it's an as-is contract or financing. All right. And you can actually go in to look at a pending contingent offer, and it'll tell you. Now, see, remarks is not a good one, but let's look at another one here. Third-party approval. So, you know, you can take a look at the reason why it was pending and possibly if that's inspection or financing, what's wrong with calling the listing agent saying, how does that offer look? Would you accept a backup offer? So we have backup offers, we have back on market, we have calling pending contingent listings to see if there's not some other opportunities out there for your buyer. Okay. So that we can kind of end our discussion about what's going on in the current market and options you might have to expand the opportunities for buyers. Let's talk a little bit about valuation. Obviously, the CMA is the word that we use to try to figure out what the comparables are in the market. There's a couple of fairly handy tools that I'd like to show you. I'm going to go back into MLS. I'm going to go back to my dashboard. And on the face of MLS now, there is a few things you can do. If you go down here to external links, all right, there's a link here for a nice little add-on that we have called Remind Pro. And I brought that up on the screen here for you. Let's see. Sorry. Let's see what we got here. Okay. Does anybody use Remind Pro? No? Really cool application there. And you can use this in many ways. One of the quickest ways to use this is to do a search for a particular property and find out about what it's worth. All right. So we'll go into North Naples here, and let's take a look at what we can see. So we can pick out a particular, see if it keeps coming up. I'll get some listings going here. You can continue to zero in on a particular area, right? And then let's take a look at one of these areas here. All right, so we got a 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom house. We're going to copy. Hold on. So we're going to look at this now, and we can now go over and do a complete analysis of this property. Okay. Hopefully. Can everybody see that okay? Yes? See where it says valuation? If I can make that any bigger. All right, so every one of the properties that you put in, whether it's your customer's address or whether you're looking at a listing like we are, okay, will give you the complete information on that property. So I'll show you, if you've got an address, we'll copy that address, we'll go over here to search, we'll put that address into the box here to get a bigger screen. Can everybody see that okay? Yes? All right. So what Remind does is it's going to look to you a lot like you would pull up an MLS listing with a lot of the information here. But you see what it says, single family residential equity owned by, and it's going to tell you a lot of information about this property. Okay. So we can go and look at that property. See, it's currently listed. One of the interesting things to see is we now know this property was purchased in 2019, and it was, there's the taxes, there's the valuation, which is kind of important. So we now know that these people have quite a bit of equity. So now we're starting to take a look at an equity analysis for a buyer and also a valuation. Okay. So if we're going to call this was an unlisted property, you're going to call, one of the things, I don't know how many of you are on the James Shaw call in the morning, but if you're not, it's a great idea to jump on there for 15 or 20 minutes and listen to all the millionaire real estate agents that share in there. But the point is that an equity analysis is a great way to prospect for listings in today's market, because you can call somebody and say, hey, would you like to understand, we'd like to know how much equity you have in your home. It's not a sales pitch, it's an offer of information. So you can see that these people have a valuation of $835,000. Notice it's on the market for $990. But you see at $835,000, they have almost $500,000 worth of equity. So we're working on valuation here, and we're working on an equity analysis. So these are really important pieces of information, and they're available to you to any address, any property address you put in. Okay. Here's the history of the property. It was sold in for $440,000 less than 3 years ago. And down here now, here's the mortgage history of the property. Okay, there's the mortgage they took out when they bought the property in September of 19. And here's some valuations. Okay, the Zestimate Zillow is 966. The Remind valuation is 700, and the First American valuation is 835,211. So the equity analysis is based on the highest valuation, other than I don't believe they use this estimate. But this is just giving you an idea hopefully it's not as disparate as this, but it's giving you an idea of what you can get a little analysis of the demographics for that area, owners and associated people. You can get information there. And obviously this is a listed property, so you're not going to be able to contact these people, but I just happened to pick out an address. So I would suggest that you become familiar with this option on your MLS screen, and then you use it when you're taking a look at valuing a property. Are there any questions, or is this good stuff? Okay. Stop my share. Let's go back to all right, so I'm back on my dashboard for MLS. And another thing that you can do is search for a particular property. And I'll just show you a little bit about, let's go back to one of the last searches and see what happens here. That's lot of land, we don't want that one. I can find a okay, so here's a listing. Can you see that okay? Yes? Chris, can you see it? You're the only one on camera. I got to rely on you. All right, so every one of these MLS listings has a few things that you can check and see if you know, for additional information when you're trying to value a property, when you've looked it up. Maybe you've looked up an older listing. This one happens to be an active listing in Naples, 415,000. Notice we can now click on this property ID field here. And this will take us over to a realist report. Right? We can launch realist from here, but we're going to get a neighborhood, a little bit of neighborhood information here. All right. Notice that CoreLogic has an automated valuation method. And while I encourage you, you know, when you're doing a listing appointment or talking to somebody about listing their property, that you know what the Zestimate is, it may not be that accurate. It may not be as refined as some of these other ones we're showing you. So you can always get this particular real AVM. This is the CoreLogic automated valuation method, and it has a fairly high confidence score. Therefore, you'll notice that the range is 294 to 352. So they're using 323, 400 as their valuation method from CoreLogic. That's part of our realist package. Again, it's just another sign of value. But you can also see the last time this was sold. You can see what the current market price is. You can see the valuation method is 323. It's on the market for 415. So, you know, you just have to kind of use your good judgment here as to whether these valuation methods are helping you. But these are all things you can do in advance of doing a detailed CMA. So let's copy that address and let's go over to, now that we have another valuation method available to you, and it's known as RPR, Realtor Property Resource. And I don't know how many of you ever use that, but we're going to jump over there and show it to you. Share screen, property resource. Okay, so as a Realtor member of NAR, you can go to NAR realtor.rpr.com, right? And if you haven't created an account, you can create an account, and you can take advantage of the software that was written really for realtors only. Part of your dues to NAR go to the use of this product, and it can be pretty useful. So I'm just going to take that last property that we looked at, and I'm going to search it. Okay, so you can put any property address in, and this is the realtor valuation method, another way of determining value, right? You can see it's listed for 415, but the realtor valuation method is 404. And we can take a look at the details here. So in the details of this, you can see there's their range. And you can see that the so when this is basically another form of a CMA, and it's basically done by the software created for your realtor property resource, right? And it's going to show you both public record sales and MLS sales that are being used to calculate this value here, okay? So these can be comps that have been selected both from MLS and public records within you can see a very tight range around this property. You know, we're dealing with less than half a mile, 0.5 of a mile. And so you can start to see that we have quite a few comps, and then some off-market properties that are expired, closed in public records, right? So you've got a nice selection of public record and MLS comps that have been used to calculate this particular valuation. One of the things you can do, which I like about RPR, is you looked up an address and you can always go in and refine the value. And what I like about this method is you can go in here and you can update. We know from MLS that this is a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom property. Let's see, we can go back over to. There we go. So we can add information in here, 2 bedrooms, 2 full baths. And now if you're working on a listing and you know that there's been a major improvement to the kitchen or to various categories of the home, right? Bathroom remodels, you can go ahead in there and put in any of these things, right? And put in the month it was completed, the year it was completed, and the cost in there, and it will add that value to the value of the home. The other part that I kind of like about this is you can adjust using these sliders to adjust for conditions in that make your listing or your valuation of this property a little bit. So we know we're in a hot market, right? And maybe we have a little more privacy, maybe we have a little better view, so you can see how you can add value to this valuation and come up with a refined value of 448,000. Now we may have overcooked it a little bit there, but if we just have equal to the other comps and we have equal here, you can see we still added a little bit to the value of the home based on the market. So you can now create a report off of that you could share with your customer, and this is going to be have oftentimes a few more comps than you're going to get when you just do a straight MLS CMA. You can also use this tool to go ahead in here and do your own CMA, right? So this is the information we have, and we would go in and confirm the facts. We make any changes here. Listing data, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. We could make any changes there, right? We could go and find comps. We could use the comps that are already out there, right? And you can do this on a comparative basis or a sales comparison evaluation there, all right? So we confirm the facts. Then we can find the comps. Remember, the comps have we've already got a lot of comps that the system gave you, and you're going to check the ones that you're going to use. And you can add your comps in, or you can change the comps depending upon what you want there. But here we can search. And this will give us 22 comps. Again, if it says used in RVM, maybe this one wasn't. This one was. So you can kind of go through here, and this is even a little bit more detailed way than using the one in Matrix, because the one in Matrix is only going to use MLS comps unless you put in public record comps. All right, so we've added to our comps. There's 22 here, which is a good list. We're going to update those valuations and close. Then we're going to adjust the comps. Okay, so adjusting comps is a little bit more of an art than a science, but basically, if there's a pool or a 4th bedroom or a 3-car garage versus a 2-car garage, you can use this to go through and make any type of adjustments, right, to the comp. Remember, comparable better subtract, subject better add. Either way you like it. If the subject property is better than a comp, you're going to add to the value of the comp to make it comparable to the subject. If the comparable is better, it has a pool, and we need to subtract from that comparable that doesn't have a pool and make an adjustment. So we're trying to compare as much as we can apples to apples. And this allows you to go through and use quite a few different techniques and quite a few different views here. You might adjust for the view. You might adjust for the year built. These are all built about the same time. So there's a lot of different ways that you can adjust this to add or subtract from the value of the comparable. When you're done, so then you could create a CMA report. How are we doing so far? Is this helpful to you? So there's a lot of different ways to do this. I like RPR because of the sliders. I like it because it's relatively easy to create a CMA. The problem that you get with RPR is you get these voluminous reports. So you really want to, when you go in to create a report, you really want to go ahead in there and try to tailor that report, okay? So the property report here is, or the valuation workbook you see is 74 pages. Wow. So I think that what I'd do is I'd go in here and I'd view a sample, and then I would try to take out the pages that don't really make a whole lot of sense. So that's the reason that I think that RPR can be a little challenging, because you don't necessarily want to send a 75-page report to your customer, but you might want to know property values, homeowner facts. Some of these you might want to turn off. So you can go in there and customize your report and then run it. And it does produce a nice report. Make sure you go in and set up your profile when you first go in, all right? And put your picture in and all of the information that's key to you so that when you run the report, by the way, this is a pretty good mobile program too. So if you're in an area, whether, wherever you are, you're in an area, you can use the mobile app and pull it up and it will show you home values in the area. Kind of handy especially if you're not in an area that you know a lot about, or if you're traveling somewhere, it's pretty handy. So once you get your profile updated, you can go back, hopefully somewhere. I don't want to keep going through this. There we go. So I'm back to creating my report, right? So now obviously that would help you to be able to create a CMA. Again, I would trim the report a little bit, but it still is a nice valuation. There's some other data that you can give to your customer showing the median values. There's some pretty good neighborhood stats here you could share with them too. So. All right, so that's RPR, and see if we have any questions. I don't see anything in the chat. So all right, well, I did a little, we got 10 or 15 minutes left here. So I'm gonna go ahead and let's see if we can get this going here. Yeah, I can get it going this way. All right, that's okay. Everybody see that okay, Chris? All right, this is a little PowerPoint that I did a while back, and to be honest with you, it's as useful today as it was when we did it, but the market is so tight right now that some of these things that we're going to go over here are not quite as important, but they're still, kind of important. So remember that a CMA, a comparative market analysis, is really more of an art and not a science. You're going to be making adjustments. You're going to be selecting the best comparables that you feel like are most like the subject property. Sometimes you're going to be asked to say, okay, one has a pool, the other doesn't have a pool. So what's the difference? What does a pool cost? An appraiser will give a pool 20 to 25,000. You all know you can spend $75,000 on a pool real easy. So when I talk about an art, not a science, as long as you use the same relative adjustment factors for an extra bedroom or an extra bathroom or a garage, 3-car garage versus 2, as long as you use a similar adjustment factor, it should work out. But you don't want to go crazy and try to assign too much value to a different feature that you radically change the adjusted price. So you're working with your seller to understand the market. I think this is just as useful a technique for your buyer, showing your buyer what the comparables are, understanding that the market is still going up quite dramatically, although we've seen signs that it might be starting to level off a little bit more, and the rate of price increases is clearly slowed quite a bit. In a listing presentation, it's a guide for your customer to decide on the list price. And it's your customer's decision ultimately what they want to list the home for. So I always suggest you give them a range and you give them some latitude. In this market, most sellers want to list their property above what you recommend. And they're maybe tend to go a little over the top on that. But if the listing's slightly over what you're recommending in your range, great. In this market, may happen, or it may be that they can reduce slightly and come up with a, an adjusted price that's more what the market's looking for. So you want to really become the market expert in your customers in the neighborhood of the listing that you're going to presentation you're going to make. How do you do that? Well, one of the most important things is to look at the recent activity in the market. Properties have come on the market, properties have gone pending, properties have sold, or properties that have expired and gone off the market. In addition, you want some kind of physical knowledge of that neighborhood. So go to the neighborhood and drive it. One of the real advantages we have in our market is that many of these communities are gated. So someone just driving around can't get into Gray Oaks or can't get into many of the neighborhoods. So you need to maybe make an appointment to preview a listing in there. And while you're in there, drive around, take a look at the amenities, become familiar with what this neighborhood has that another neighborhood doesn't have, and try to get as much information as you can on the market, including reaching out to the property management company and finding out what the current rates are. If there's any assessments coming, try to learn as much as you possibly can about that neighborhood so that when you go on your listing presentation, you're able to share anything that's going on in the neighborhood, and you're able to become someone who seems very knowledgeable that I would like to list my home with. So we could talk a little bit about absorption rates. Absorption rates are so high right now that it's really hard to differentiate between one market and another. But we'll do a quick evaluation of that. Okay, so the first thing we want to do in a CMA is take a look at the market absorption, just so we're aware of how many homes have sold in the last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and 120 days. So we can start to look at the rate of flow through the neighborhood. All right. When you're doing a listing presentation, always get a front photo of the home. You can do that by going to the neighborhood, driving around, taking a picture, but it really means a lot more when you send your listing presentation to a customer or bring it, that you have a picture of their home. We talked a lot about finding comparables, how you do it, recent market analysis from MLS, and also possibly going to the property appraiser site for that neighborhood and taking a look at recent sales to make sure that there aren't data in there that are not in the part of your MLS data. It's really important when we didn't do a lot of it in that RPR analysis, but it's really important that you choose comparables that are truly near the value of your subject. In other words, if you have, you're looking in a neighborhood and there are your comparable is your subject is 2,500 square feet, chances are you want to look between, let's say, 2,200 and 2,800. You don't necessarily want to look at something that's 1,800 square feet or something that's 3,500 square feet, because the footprint of those properties is much different. And when you try to make an adjustment for more than a couple 300 square feet, you're actually probably going to be making too big of an adjustment to have a comparable. So if it's 30% bigger, 20% bigger, 15, 20% smaller, you get outside of those ranges of 8 to 10%, and your adjustments are going to be too large to make it meaningful. Plus, it's difficult to compare a 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom house to a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, because all of the living areas are going to be different, and it's a different environment. So you also want to look at features, okay? If you have a pool home, the first thing I think you want to look at is other pool homes. Obviously, if there's not any other comps in the neighborhood that, in that square footage and feature range, that you can always adjust for a pool, but you're better off garages, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, pool, any lot size or garage, any additional features. Try to keep them as narrow as possible around your subject, because it'll be much easier to get a good comp. Again, we're talking a little bit about adjustments. So subject better, add. I got more value in the subject than I have in this comparable. I'm going to add value. Comparable better, subtract. The comparable's got a pool. I don't have, my subject doesn't have a pool. I've got to subtract from the comparable to get to the subject. All right. So always, I think in terms of a range. You notice that all those valuation methods had a range. I think that the best thing to do is to give your customer a range, because you're not the deciding factor. You always want to do a partnership with your customer and make sure that they make the final decision and that you're able to support that decision. Okay, we'll talk real briefly about absorption. Okay, although again, it's not as dramatic in this market because of the fact that we have so little inventory and the absorption is very high. But it's not a bad idea to go into your neighborhood that you're looking at to do the CMA and take a look at the number of closed transactions in MLS and divide that by, this is using 4 time periods, and take a look at then the current active listings on MLS and figure out the month supply. All right. So obviously this analysis was done in different real estate markets, but you want to be able to see what the month supply on the market is. Now, most of our communities are 1 month or less these days. Sometimes you might get up as high as 2, but clearly less than 6 months, which we're clearly in a seller's market. You don't need a lot of evidence beyond what we have today. Not a bad idea to take a look at the average list price of all of those closed sales, and the average selling price of all those closed sales, and the average days on market. So that's a chart you can make up for a neighborhood. You can make it up for a geo area. You can make it up for an individual complex within a major development. You can go to any level, but it's a relatively easy exercise to do this. And if you are interested, I can send you these worksheets. But basically, this is the detailed of how to calculate your absorption rate. And it's basically just taking a look at the number of homes that have sold in a period of time and comparing that into the number of active listings. Here's a little worksheet. I think with that sample was over, did 4 columns, probably 3 months, 6 months, and 9 months is probably sufficient for you to get a quick absorption rate. And, you might do, if you're working in a community, like let's say Naples Lakes, which is a golf community. Inside of Naples Lakes, there's 6 or 7 different kinds of communities in there. And each one of them, some are single family homes, some of them are mid-rise condos, some of them are coach homes. So you might look at different areas in that community. And of course, again, because of the nature of the market, we call this the pond. It's still there. It just probably isn't quite as dramatic as it was in the past, where we take a look at the market. We take a look at the number of active listings over there on the left, and we take a look at the solds, all right, in the last 3 months. And you want to see how many have sold quickly, how many have sold in a moderate period of time, and how many are unsold. So again, in a typical market where we have more of a balanced market, you're always going to have 3 layers of inventory based on how quickly they move, and this can affect the price that your customer decides to list at. Sure. If you want any of these documents, the buyer notice, any of the things we've gone over today, just Jones Naples at KW, I'll put it in the chat here. Just email me and I'll send it right back to you. So this was a cool little chart. Again, back in the days when we had a balanced market, there were always a layer of homes that had been out there that had been on the market for a long time and hadn't sold. So a lot of them were priced much higher than some of their other cohorts with the same features and the same benefits. So again, just a chart that might be helpful to you. Not so much stagnant mass in this market, but we also call that stagnant mass frozen assets, because obviously if you have a listing that's not priced right and it's sitting there and sitting there, it's hard for you to monetize it. All right. So this is kind of the last slide in there, and you know, it's kind of interesting that if buyers consider location, size, features, condition, and price, what can the seller affect? Not their location, not their size, not the features. You know, obviously nobody's going to put a pool in to sell a home. And then so understand, when you're working with a seller, even in today's market, this is still true. The price and the condition of the home are the 2 things they can control. Sellers tend to want to price their properties above maybe what your CMA will show. Fine, as long as they're willing to adjust based on the number of showings and offers they've had. And condition, okay? So a little bit of money spent on fresh paint or some landscaping or some things to address some of the controversial items in a home, like a really wild color in a bedroom or clutter. You know, possibly using some staging to beef up the looks of the house can help the seller get full value. So, all right. Hey, it's 2:57. How'd I do? Are there any questions, or anybody have anything else they'd like to discuss? Did you get some value out of today's discussion? Hopefully everybody left with one tidbit of value. So good day, everybody. Again, email me if you'd like any of this stuff. I'm happy to send it to you. Have a great day.